What if the people who once ruled the earth lost the one ability that their entire civilization depended on? Why didn't the indigenous cultures of the past have writing systems? These were civilizations that left extraordinary architecture, sophisticated astronomy, and profound spiritual traditions. So why didn't they have writing systems? Also, why were they caught so unprepared and conquered so completely worldwide by just a few European nations? What if everything we think we know about the rise of our civilization is backwards? The historical narrative is that our current civilizations developed writing systems long ago and built modern societies through human ingenuity, science, and technology, while other peoples, mainly the conquered indigenous cultures, were more primitive, relied primarily on oral traditions, and tried to just live in harmony with nature. The narrative also claims that these oral tradition peoples, often labeled primitive savages, were conquered and colonized by the so-called civilized groups, namely the Europeans, who did possess writing systems and overwhelming technology, ships, and weapons of war. But I've always struggled with one question: why? Why did humanity develop along such radically different paths? Indigenous peoples were labeled as savages, after all, but I never accepted that they were somehow so disadvantaged that they could be conquered in an overwhelming fashion during the period from about the 1500s to the late 1800s of the modern era. There had to be another reason for their collapse and conquest, and not just the claim that 90% of the native populations died from diseases introduced by the Europeans like smallpox, measles, and the common flu, despite having healthier diets, active lifestyles, and a deep harmony with the natural world. There also had to be a reason for their lack of writing systems. What if originally they weren't at a disadvantage at all? What if they were more advanced before a global reset, but in a completely different way? What if their primary form of communication and technology wasn't achieved through spoken or written language at all, but direct communication through consciousness? I'm referring to telepathy and perhaps other abilities like intuition. Despite the architectural and intellectual achievements of indigenous peoples worldwide, it was a mystery to me how they could have been decisively and overwhelmingly conquered by the colonial powers, not just militarily, but intellectually, culturally, and spiritually, as they were systematically coerced into Christianity. Again, the question: how could civilizations with extraordinary architecture, sophisticated astronomy, and profound spiritual traditions lose everything? Why did these civilizations collapse right before or right after colonization by the Europeans? What if the answer isn't simply that one civilization was more technologically advanced or militarily superior, or nature-loving indigenous peoples somehow became vulnerable to disease, again despite having healthier diets, active lifestyles, and a deep harmony with the natural world? What if it was because the very rules of the world changed? What if the people who once ruled the earth lost the one ability that their entire civilization depended on? What if it was the loss of telepathy that caused those great civilizations to completely collapse and struggle just to survive, while other less advanced people, who were not telepathic but did have writing systems, ended up in a better position after a global reset to rebuild and eventually take over the new world? And if it happened once, could it happen again? In the age of the telepathic peoples, the most advanced civilization was not based on writing systems. It was based on consciousness. Thoughts could be shared, Emotions could be understood, knowledge could be accessed and transferred directly between people, and even between people and nature itself. This ancient civilization did not depend on the same systems that later societies constructed. They did not need enormous bureaucracies. They did not need massive written archives. They did not need external networks. They did not need the internet. Their internet was consciousness itself. Because of this ability, the telepathic peoples became the dominant cultures of the world. They were the builders of great civilizations. Their greatest technology was not something they created, it was something within themselves. However, the telepathic peoples were not the only humans on Earth. Another group existed alongside them, and this would be the written word peoples. These humans did not possess the same telepathic abilities. Instead, they relied on another method for communicating and preserving knowledge: writing systems. Writing allowed them to store information outside the human mind. They created records, symbols, and written works for science, communication, and entertainment even. This knowledge could be stored in books, libraries, and archives. Their civilization was slower compared to that of the telepathic peoples. During the telepathic age, they were not the dominant power. The written word peoples were at a great disadvantage. They lived in the shadow of a civilization that possessed an ability they did not have. But they possessed something the telepathic peoples did not fully appreciate: a way to preserve knowledge after a collapse. Then came the first great reset. Something changed. The Earth's conditions changed. Human consciousness changed. The connection between minds weakened. The telepathic ability disappeared or became inaccessible, and the civilization that had been built around it collapsed. This was not because the telepathic peoples were unintelligent. It was because their entire society depended on a foundation that no longer existed. Imagine modern civilization losing electricity and the entire internet. Not just losing entertainment, not just losing convenience, losing the foundation of everything: communication, transportation, industry, information. The same thing happened to the telepathic civilization. Their knowledge existed, but the method of accessing it was gone. After the reset, the balance of power shifted. The people who had once been disadvantaged became the rulers of the new age. The written word peoples survived because they had preserved knowledge externally, and they knew how to access and communicate it. They had records, they had systems. This gave them a massive advantage and the ability to rebuild the new world quickly, as the former telepathic peoples struggled with basic survival. Writing became the foundation of the new civilization. This led to science, industry, technology, and eventually the digital age. The written word peoples created a new world order based on external knowledge. They conquered, expanded, and built global civilizations. The former rulers of the telepathic age became the forgotten peoples. The cycle had reversed. However, according to this theory, every age eventually reaches the same problem. It becomes too dependent on its greatest strength. The written word peoples created something extraordinary: a technological civilization. But technology depends on electricity. The modern world has created a massive external brain: the internet, digital archives, artificial intelligence, global communication. But what happens if this system fails? What happens if electricity disappears? Modern humanity could face the same crisis as the indigenous telepathic peoples before them. A civilization with enormous amounts of knowledge, but without access to this knowledge. If this theory is correct, the next reset will once again reverse the balance of power. Technology, as we know it, will disappear. The written word peoples, about 90% of our current world population, will be the ones who struggle to survive this time. Rebuilding the lost systems will be slow and painful, if not impossible, given the loss of physical records and electronic communication, not to mention the disappearance of everything that has to do with electricity. According to NASA, the Earth periodically undergoes major electromagnetic reversals, or resets, which cause significant drops in field strength and global environmental shifts. A change in the relationship between Earth, the Sun, cosmic energy. This change affects not only technology, but consciousness itself. Modern civilization is built upon a very specific electromagnetic environment. Electricity, communication systems, satellites, computers, the entire digital world all depend on the stability of this environment. But what if this environment changes? What if the rules that allow our technology to function are altered? The systems that created the power of the written word peoples could suddenly disappear. Imagine a world where electricity no longer behaves as expected according to the laws of physics and science. Machines fail, digital information disappears, global communication collapses, the technological civilization loses its greatest advantage. This would create a new dark age, not because humanity loses its intelligence, but because humanity loses access to its accumulated knowledge. The modern world would face the same challenge that the telepathic peoples faced after the previous reset. A civilization built on one foundation is suddenly forced to survive without it. Meanwhile, with the disappearance of electricity comes the reemergence of telepathy. The telepathic peoples will return. The civilization that was powerless in the previous age will become powerful again. The cycle repeats. The telepathic peoples will lead the consciousness age. The written word peoples will lead the technological age. And this theory is not about understanding the ages so that one group can win the game. People are people. I'm sure there is good and evil in both time periods, and both ages have something to offer. The telepathic age rewards connection, intuition, collective consciousness, and most importantly, harmony with nature and the ability to access knowledge internally. The technological age, on the other hand, rewards organization, innovation, science, and most importantly, writing and the ability to preserve knowledge externally. Each age has its own rulers because of the natural environment. Each age creates its own forgotten peoples. The powerful civilization of one era becomes vulnerable in the next. The oppressed civilization of one era may become the dominant civilization after a reset. The true advancement of humanity may not be becoming more powerful. It may be becoming whole again. Eternal balance.